in the northwest at the Swartruggens Dam. Very worrying numbers. We now understand it's only 6.4% full. The scorching heat wave certainly hasn't been helping. In addition to that, we've also been hearing warnings and seeing warnings, in fact, if you've experienced it, that Gauteng is just one El Nino phenomenon away from a water crisis. Well, let's bring an expert into this and discuss weather patterns. I'm joined by senior researcher at the CSIR. It's Professor Francois Engelbrecht. Professor, good evening to you. Is this the start of the end for South Africa? Is Gauteng about to become a drought area?
Good evening, Gareth, and to all the viewers. Yes, Gauteng is certainly at risk of increased droughts occurring and affecting the province as climate change is strengthening globally and also over South Africa. I think many of the viewers will remember that at the end of the summer of the year 2015-16, there were in fact quite severe water restrictions implemented across the Gauteng province. And that was because the dams that are supplying Gauteng with water, well, many of those dams were below 30% at the end of that summer. So indeed, the big risk here is so-called multi-year droughts. So when we have one big El Nino event causing a year of rainfall far below normal, but then it's followed up by another 2 or 3 such years, it's then that we are really at risk of facing what we may call a day zero in Gauteng. And climate change is systematically increasing that risk for South Africa.
Professor, forgive the ignorant question, but the phenomenon of El Nino seems to be fairly recent in the last decade. Has this always been around and we've only given it a title now? Or is this something that you can go back in the history books and is fairly normal?
No, it's in fact a part of the natural climate variability of the Earth system. And the name El Nino, in fact, dates back several hundreds of years. It means the little boy child. It's a very interesting history that there is to the name. The name has been given by Spanish fishermen on the west coast of South America because this phenomena, which in fact refers to the warming of the waters of the Central and Eastern Pacific Ocean, occurs every 2 to 7 years, more or less around Christmas time. So that's where the name comes from. These events have been with us for a long time, but of course, as our water demand is increasing in South Africa, we are becoming more and more vulnerable to these events.
Yeah.
And then global warming is also projected to cause a gradual strengthening and a higher frequency of these El Nino events. And that's, of course, not good news for us in South Africa.
No, it's not. And I'm so glad you mentioned that it seems to be cyclical, or there seems to be a pattern around this. So the problem isn't El Nino. El Nino is going to happen whether we like it or not. It's how we're going to manage that. So, Professor, I put this to you. Where are we getting this so horribly wrong? If we know it's coming, why aren't we prepared for it?
Well, there are 2 factors at play here. Firstly, climate is changing. So El Nino events will in future be more intense, and the strong El Nino events will occur far more frequently than we are used to them occurring. So that is an important change in the regional climate system. Then secondly, South Africa is already much warmer than it is supposed to be. So we are already about 2 degrees Celsius warmer in the central interior regions than we've been 100 years ago. So that means we have more evaporation from our big dams and also more evaporation from our soils, which also directly affect agriculture. And then on top of that, South Africa, of course, wants to grow its industries, and all our big cities are growing. So the water demand from the city dwellers and from industries and from our coal-fired power plants, the demand is just going up and up. But climate change is gradually going to make our country drier and drier. And that's why we are heading towards a future that is going to be extremely difficult to manage from a water availability and a water security perspective.
You're painting a bit of a doomsday, post-apocalyptic kind of picture for me, Professor, this evening. Is it too late for us in Gauteng and for the country, or is there something we can now do to try and get on top of this? Don't tell people to save water. The hotter it gets, the more water they want. The more water they use, the less water there is available. That's not a solution. How do we get on top of this?
We need both global and local action. So firstly, South Africa is vulnerable to what the rest of the world is going to do in terms of mitigating climate change. The big opportunity that we still have today is the Paris Agreement. And if the Paris Agreement can be implemented effectively, and we can see drastic reductions in greenhouse gas emissions over the next 12 years, then we still have a chance of significantly reducing the effects of climate change worldwide, but also in our own country. So, yes?
Forgive me, Professor, final question to you. What's our timeline? What's the timeline you're looking at?
Well, the occurrence of further significant rises in heatwave occurrences over South Africa, and also the doubling of these very strong El Nino events, these changes are just a few decades away. So we have about, as an international community, the latest science tells us that the next 12 years are critical. Already by the year 2030, we need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions worldwide with 45% compared to the 2010 levels. So immediate, what we call climate action, is necessary. And then within our own country, the focus should be on adaptation. So we know that we are likely to see reduced rainfall totals over the next few decades and higher temperatures. So we need to adapt and improve our water management strategies in the country. We need to adapt in all the different spheres of agriculture so that we are as well prepared as we possibly can be for these impacts we are to face.
Professor, I want to say thank you, but very, very worrying news you're giving to us this evening. My thanks to senior researcher at CSIR, Professor Francois Engelbrecht, joining us with that worrying news. 2030 seems to be the timeline. We're almost in that decade, so I'm sure we'll get more experts in on how to save water and also how to deal with global warming as we very quickly head towards 2030.